The African comic book scene is coming onto its own with more original stories being told from Nigeria, South Africa, Ghana, Egypt, Uganda, Ethiopia, Zimbabwe, and Zambia. And their rosters which host characters such as Hawi, Razorman, Kwezi, Kanzar, Sanu, Ganyamuto, Newman, and many more. And while I would really like to talk about them, I really haven't read enough about them to actually make a huge discussion about it. But do tell me down in the comment section below if you would like to have that discussion someday in the future. For this discussion though, I really wanted us to look at the new DC Slate and what it has in store for the African characters of the DC universe. For if you haven't noticed, in the DCU, we haven't really had much representation in the past. And with the release of that new Blue Beetle trailer, as well as the countdown to Flashpoint, which is just a few months away, I feel like this reboot and the slate that follows it has the perfect setup for the accommodation of our African characters who, well, haven't had much of the limelight. Hello and welcome to AER, where you do get to enjoy the ramblings of a local African man who simply loves art, which includes comics, their movies, and their animated material. I am your host Uncle Omari, and in this video we shall be looking at some of the DC characters of African descent who we can incorporate into the new DC slate under James Gunn. Now, for some of these, I have thought of ways in which they can be incorporated into the Chapter 1 that was announced 2 months ago by James Gunn himself. However, for some of them, I feel like they would need a little bit more time to be established. So for those characters, I won't actually be giving them any Chapter 1 designations. I also do have a fair few entries that I would love to discuss, so I will be discussing them in terms of the likelihood of them actually being incorporated into the DC slate, as well as my general opinions and enjoyment of their characters and what I would like to see. Getting right into it, I would like to start with the Orishas. This is a pantheon group that borrows heavily from Yoruba culture. Therefore, it is comprised of deities and godlike beings whose representations are not that far from what we get from the Greek mythological beings of the DCU. Just right there you can tell that these gods and goddesses, demigods and demigoddesses, would make for quite an interesting addition to the Themysciran epic that is Paradise Lost. Not to mention that Chapter 1 is legit called Gods and Monsters, and the Orishas are African gods. When talking about this particular project, James Gunn referred to it as a Game of Thrones with the Themyscirans, being the female warrior group who separated themselves from the conventional Greek Olympian rule in the DCU. And much like Game of Thrones, where we got to see how different regions handle their own politics, it would be very interesting to incorporate the Orishas and show how their pantheon actually manages their patriarchal rules, which is kind of the key factor that splits this all-female warrior group from the DCU's larger Greek pantheon. And the same topic of the patriarchal rule is nothing new to the African cultures. For me, these two stories just kind of meld well together, and I would like to see the Orishas be incorporated into the Paradise Lost story if they could do that right. However, in terms of likelihood, I am not so sure that we would be seeing this right now. I also chose to not list the Orishas one by one because there are so many of them, so kindly do forgive me for that omission. Next up, we have Jacques Foccart and his younger sister Danielle Foccart, aka the Invisible Kid and Computer, who hail from the Côte d'Ivoire of the 30th century, which might not be Côte d'Ivoire anymore. However, I still claim them as my African brother and sister, or rather nephew and niece, or great grandnephew and grandniece, because the 30th century is quite a long way away. Anyway, these two are part of the League of Superheroes who are not listed in the Chapter 1 Gods and Monsters DC slate. However, we do have Booster Gold, who is also a time-traveling superhero from the future, and this actually creates the perfect set piece for Jacques and his sister Danielle to actually appear in that TV series via the way of Computer using her powers to connect to one of the machinery from her time or from Booster Gold's time to propel them back to the past and bring them to the timeline where Booster Gold is present. This would mostly be a cameo type of appearance, which would have them show up for the series for maybe as an episode or two, I guess. I do not see this one being that likely, but I would love to see them represented regardless. So I'll just zoom past them and go to the next entry, which I titled The Doctors. The first Doctor being Dr. Fate, who we saw in the JLA version of Black Adam, of which I have to say, Pierce Brosnan delivered a perfect iteration of Dr. Fate for that universe. However, we all know that that universe is not the same one being rebooted. So there is a very high likelihood that he will not be reprising his own role as Dr. Fate despite his magnificent performance in that role. Or maybe he will, I don't know, I'm not James Gunn. What I do know though is that we have another iteration of Dr. Fate whose original alter ego is the Egyptian Dr. Khalid Nassour. And this is one of those golden opportunities for Hollywood where they get to knock out two representations with one casting, as Dr. Khalid is not only African but also Muslim, and where we don't get all that deep into Dr. Fate from the Black Adam movie. The new Slate is another perfect opportunity to have him reintroduced to the audience, and the Gods and Monsters chapter is perfect for the discussion of Nabu, the ancient Egyptian deity who inhabits the helmet of fate. I didn't give him any particular chapter 1 designation because with Dr. Fate he can fit into near almost any story in the DCU. As is sort of the case with our next entry, Dr. Mist, whom I like to call the African Vandal Savage, or at least the original iteration of this character would be closer to Vandal Savage being an immortal African practitioner of the mystic arts. There is a second iteration of Nomo of Kor, who is known as Nomo Balewa from South Africa, who is also the Dr. Mist of the post-Flashpoint era. And you see where I'm going with this because after the Flashpoint movie, there is the chance to actually incorporate this character into the stories. We have seen this character before in the Constantine TV series, and I would love for him to get another iteration that gives him a little more time to shine and show just how powerful this character can be. And much like the DC universe, no universe is complete without relying heavily on the Batman, which segues us into our next entry, who is Batwing, the Batman of Africa. This might not seem like a new character from the offset because we have seen some iterations of this character. However, that was Luke Fox's Batwing, who is the son to Lucius Fox, an inventor who has been working for Batman for a very long time. The iteration I'm talking about for Batwing though is David Zavimbe, the Congolese police officer turned superhero called Batwing. That is the character whom I would love to see incorporated into the new DCU, though I do admit that Batman the Brave and the Bold would not be the place of entry for Batwing, as that movie already seems like it is packed with characters from the Bat family. But hey, maybe in chapter 2 we can get our David Zavimbe Batwing iteration. In my penultimate entry, I have the beasts being Bwana Beast and the Freedom Beast, with this one being sort of a reversal of what we had with Batwing, where we have the predecessor, Bwana Beast, being more prevalent in media than his actual successor in the Freedom Beast. And whilst they do have the same costume and power set, which consists of being able to communicate with animals as well as to merge them and create a chimera, the iteration that I am specifically rooting for is that of Freedom Beast, who is South African, whereas Bwana Beast is American and still got his powers from a Kilimanjaro cave. Or that helmet he got from that red ape. Comic book origins are weird. But the reason I root for Freedom Beast more is because his story has such a unique setting and could be done as a period piece where we focus on this particular African hero who has his powers during the time of the South African apartheid. Dominic Mdawe's story just has this RRR feeling already to it before it is even written. Heck, Gun, give me this story, I will write this story for you. And my final entry is dedicated to my Ghanaian queen, the Vixen, whose alter ego is Marie Jiwe McCabe. Of all the characters I've given entries today, this is one character whom I believe can hold a movie or a series of her own, especially if that adaptation is borrowing heavily from G. Willow Wilson's 5-issue limited series Vixen Return of the Lion. I believe that the Vixen not only has one of the most fun and, if you're being honest, broken power sets in comic books period, but she also boasts some of the most interesting and intriguing stories to ever be told in the DCU, and I would love to see more of her stories fleshed out on the big screen. Anyway, that is all I had for you today. I would love to go through more of these characters and even more in depth into their stories, their origins, and their power sets. However, that would make this video way too long, and my history has told me that the longer my videos are, the less the viewership will be. So do tell me your thoughts about the new DC slate and what you would like to see in James Gunn's new DCU era. Thank you for watching this video. I will be having another one about the African characters in the Marvel Universe. I have been your host, Uncle Omari, and I cannot wait to see you all in the next one.